Good morning. I'm Kathryn Taylor, and this is the story behind my story.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey Doctorow,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Kathryn Taylor.
Thanks for tuning in to Author Stories. You can find archives of all of the shows at hankgarner.com. And when you're there, look over in the right-hand sidebar and subscribe to the show. It's free to subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, now Spotify, YouTube, and anywhere you listen to podcasts. That's hankgarner.com. I'd like to tell you about a few folks before we get into today's interview. Ernie Howard has a new book up for pre-order. It's called Melody 8. My mother used to sing to me when I was scared at night. She would lay beside me and I would place my head on her chest, hearing the song through the vibration of her body. I loved my mother's voice, right up to the day she was put to death because of it. If you're a lover of post-apocalyptic stories, you need to get ready for a new twist on the genre. We must change the vibration, or the frequency will forever change us. Melody 8. Pre-order it now from Ernie Howard. Soulbreaker by Clara Colson is free right now. There's a dangerous monster loose on the streets of Aurora, Michigan, and Detective Cal Kinsey is determined to stop it, or die trying. 2 years ago, Cal Kinsey was an up-and-coming cop in the Aurora Police Department, but during a fateful nighttime stakeout in search of a prolific killer, Cal witnessed the darkest corner of his dreams come to life. A rogue vampire slaughtered his partner and introduced Cal to the supernatural world he never knew existed in the shadows. Soulbreaker is free now from Clara Colson. There's a link to it in the show notes. Also by August Ansel, After the Pretty Pox, The Attic. A searing act of bioterrorism, a catastrophic plague they call the Pretty Pox. Most of the human race is dead, and for 2 years, Ari McInnes has been alone, riding out the aftermath of the disease. Hidden in the attic of her ruined home, Ari survives by wit and skill, ritual and habit. Convinced that humans are little more than a dangerous fluke of nature, she chooses solitude, even in matters of life and death. Ari's precarious world is upended when her youngest brother, a man she's never met, appears out of nowhere with a badly injured woman. Their presence in the attic draws the attention of a dark watcher in the woods, and Ari is soon forced to choose between the narrow ideas that have sustained her and a stubborn instinct to love and protect. In Book 1 of August Ansel's captivating post-apocalyptic series, After the Pretty Pox casts an unwavering eye on what it means to be human in a world where nature has the upper hand, and the only rules left to live by, for good or ill, are the ones written on our hearts. After the Pretty Pox, The Attic. There's a link to it in the show notes. Now on to our show. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Kathryn Taylor on the show with me. Kathryn has a fantastic new book called 2-1, and this is a really powerful book. I think you guys are really going to enjoy it. Kathryn, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on the show today. Kathryn, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
I think it came very early. I was fortunate when I was young. In the first grade, I developed a love of reading and writing. The words came easily to me, and I kind of took it from there. I knew from the age of 6, when I was in first grade, that I wanted to teach. And so the writing portion of it came with just journals that were provided to me by my mom for gifts, I think because she enjoyed writing. And as a teacher and then as a single mom, the writing kind of was put on the back burner until I had an experience that the only way that I could work through it was in writing. and thus the book 2 minus 1, a memoir, was born.
You said that early on you knew that you wanted to be a teacher. What was it about that fascinated you, do you think?
You know, even at 6, and even in a private Catholic small school, before they had things like peer tutoring and cooperative learning, because reading came easily to me, my teacher assigned me or allowed me or encouraged me to work with others who were having difficulties with it. And if you know anyone who's a teacher, or I'm sure you have a favorite teacher that you still recall from your personal experience, the gift of teaching is unlocking that dimension and that excitement in another person. And even at 6 years old, I felt that. I felt that immense internal reward when I was able to help someone else read that book. And I think probably the fact that she allowed me to put gold stars on their papers when that was a bonus too.
That was what put it over the edge, isn't it?
That put it over the top. And you know, I didn't think about it then, but that drove my whole future. I knew then at 6 that I wanted to teach, and I knew that's what I was going to do. And I didn't realize until many, many years later that most people don't know exactly what they want to do. They stumble into it, or they get directed into it. So I think it was a real gift that happened to me so early on.
My oldest son is a teacher. He's an English teacher. I've got lots of friends that are teachers. It seems to me that there are some parallels between the gift, the art of teaching, and storytelling. Do you feel, now that you've written this book and kind of have seen both sides of that, do you recognize any parallels between communicating to, in a classroom setting or on a one-on-one and what you do in writing?
I do. I really do. I think that the entire process, and my background was essentially first grade, so I took those little ones and had them start journaling and had them start by drawing a picture, and then a story wheel with just words around it, and processing and editing and expanding and encouraging. And I think that process is the same, whether you're in first grade or you are in your 5th or 6th decade. I think that we take an idea or an experience that is so important and profound to us, and then we expand and we edit and we polish and we perfect.
Gotcha. Were you a big reader as a youngster?
I was a voracious reader. And keep in mind, when I started reading, I was reading Dick and Jane. That's what was provided to us. But fortunately, I was within walking distance of a library, and every Saturday, that was our outing, and I read every Nancy Drew and every Trixie Belden and every early biography about every woman, Clara Barton and Helen Keller. I just came home with a pile and was ready to go back by Tuesday, but I had to wait until Saturday.
I am a big fan of biographies as well. What is it about biographies that really intrigues you?
I I think the commonality, the universal plight that we all face, I think especially in today's world, it seems to me that we are becoming more isolated and more insular, and not losing sight of how connected we all are as human beings, and that we all face the same struggles. We all have obstacles to overcome. We all have losses we have to deal with, and we can continue to move forward after experiencing those.
When you've written a memoir now, do you feel like that love of biographies and learning, there's a craft to writing biography or memoir, and it's, finding the narrative thread in a life, or in a certain window to a life. Do you feel like that time loving those kinds of books helped you to understand the narrative process?
I think that's a really interesting question. I think, yes, I'm sure it did, because the first book that I read that was a memoir was Anne Frank, The Diary of a Young Girl. And I guess that was not the first book, but that was the first one that I really, really noticed the insight and the impact that this young woman was making in such a deadly situation. And I think that, like her, as a writer, I didn't think about the impact that my story might make on someone else. I was just trying to make sense of my world, and I did that through journaling and through my narrative. And when it was completed, it was suggested that it should go beyond just a story that helped me, that it would help others. And I think there are. I think you're very insightful. There are a lot of parallels.
When did you start journaling?
Oh, I started journaling when I was very young, maybe second or third grade. Again, I think, and my mother has been deceased for many years, and it's one of those questions I can't ask now, but I think probably she made sure that there were journals, or at that time they were diaries with the little locks on them and a little key.
Right.
That your older brother tormented you with, when he pried it open. But I think that in retrospect, she was encouraging me to follow a dream that perhaps she, because of her generation, did not have the opportunity to follow. And then in junior high school, she encouraged me to do, at that time they had little writing tests or contests in the backs of magazines, and she encouraged me to try that, and I did. And of course I got a response that said I was very talented and could be groomed even further for a further expense, which my parents had no money. So I just journaled. I journaled all through my life.
What do you think you gained from journaling?
Throughout my life, or throughout this recent experience?
Through this recent experience, do you feel like that the habit of journaling and the process of recognizing pertinent points during the day that you work through, or how do you feel like that affected your storytelling?
It affected every aspect of it. It actually it probably saved my life. Um, my situation was, well, I thought it was very unique. It's not. It happens all too often, but it was very debilitating, and I felt very, very lost and very isolated and very filled with shame. And since I was given no answers, I resorted to what I always resorted to, was a book and a blank page. And I wrote and wrote and wrote and questioned and reviewed, and it allowed me to work through the most painful situation that I've ever experienced.
So let's talk about this experience for just a minute. 2 minus 1 is the new book, and this is the story of you going through this kind of horrific experience and coming through the other side. Tell us a little bit about what prompted this book. What was the thing that happened that birthed this book?
I had been married and divorced at a young age, and I had raised 2 daughters on my own and was very content and satisfied with my life. I had 2 beautiful young daughters who were ready to go off on their own. I was at the peak of my educational teaching career, and I was looking for nothing else. I felt totally fulfilled on all levels. And a man who had been a friend of the family, and who I knew quite well because our children were in the same grades and participated in the same activities, began to change his perspective from friendship to romance. And although I wasn't willing or interested in that, it developed, and I became willing to take a chance. And we were married after many years. We were married. I was convinced that his words, "You can quit waiting for the other shoe to drop. I'm in this for life." I was convinced that those were true. And so we married and relocated, and were enjoying the fact that we were healthy and happy and committed in our relationship and had no elder care responsibilities, that our children were healthy and independent. And suddenly he determined that he was finished with our marriage and didn't want to talk about it. And so that's what happened. He was finished with the marriage and would not talk about it. So I journaled.
Wow. And this was, you alluded to it, but you really gave up your former life, if you will, and moved and it just changed your trajectory from where you were. So now not only, do you have this relationship that's failing, but you're kind of, out of your element too, aren't you?
I was. Coincidentally, after we were married, he was asked, and we knew this was coming, and we discussed it, but there was a relocation for his business or for his career, and so we relocated. I resigned, again, at the top of my career. I left my network. I left my daughters. I sold my home, and it was not long after I sold my home that he decided that he was finished. So not only was I dealing with a completely unexpected loss, but I was dealing with it in, it could have been a foreign country for all that it mattered, that I was relocated. I was alone. I was totally isolated. I had no job. I had no network. But, you know, in hindsight, or not in hindsight, in retrospect, I believe that scenario, Hank, was a gift. I believe truly, and I didn't believe this. This has been 5 years, but I believe that had I not done all of those things, had I not relocated, had I not been on my own, had I had that safety net of family and friends around me, I don't think I would have sunk as low, and I don't think I would have gained as much.
You alluded to it just a minute ago, that the way that he went about this was really spectacular in a kind of jaw-dropping way. We've all seen relationships that have kind of unraveled, but you tell the story that you guys were in the car and he just kind of dropped this on you and then didn't want to talk about it. You talked about that earlier, about that he didn't want to talk about it. You know, when they drop this bombshell on you like that, and he's just out and just done and leaving, and then leaves you to deal with that, what is your first reaction?
My first reaction was disbelief. We were on the way to visit his dying brother. I had planned a family reunion. I had prepared all of the food. I had made all of the arrangements, and we were in the car, and I assumed, and you know what assumed means, is
right.
that I assumed that he didn't mean any of it. That he was distraught over the impending loss of his brother. Had I thought that it was true, I would have made him pull over. I would have gotten out of the car. I certainly wouldn't have put myself in a situation where I had to pretend to be happy with a man who continuously told me that he loved me more than his next breath. I wouldn't have done that to myself. I'm not the brightest bulb in the pack, but I am not that stupid or naive. I assumed that he was upset and that he was taking it out on me, until the return trip, when he told me he was done for sure, and he was not going to talk about it. It was my fault, but it was okay because nothing was going to change. Everything would be the same, except we wouldn't be married. And I thought, okay, this is not confusion over the loss of your brother. This is crazy behavior, and something is wrong here.
So how do you begin? I would imagine that it's just devastation, and I don't know how I would emotionally respond to something like that, but I would imagine utter despair starts to set in.
Those are two perfect words. We came home. He left the next day, and I closed all of the shutters and stayed on the sofa for for weeks. I had been told that I had destroyed a perfectly good marriage. I felt more shame than I had ever felt in my life. And I was getting no input from anyone. Of course, I wasn't facing anyone because I thought, who would want to? Who would want to be around me if I was this despicable? I did not take phone calls from my daughters, from my best friend. I canceled plans, and I blubbered. I just cried. I sobbed. I thought I was stronger than that, but it was so unexpected. And I stayed there for far too long until I received a text from my best friend of nearly 40 years who told me that she was going to connect, that this enough was enough. She needed to know that I was safe. She didn't care if all I did was cry, but she was calling, and if I did not answer the phone, the police would be at my door to make sure that I was okay.
So, and in the book, you go into all the detail of what happened, and I want people to get their own copy of 2-1 to get all of the details. But how did you begin? How did journaling come into this, and then how did the idea to write this book come?
Well, the journaling was ongoing. Even when I was lying there, I had 13 journals, and it was, and I had a best friend and I had a therapist once my best friend showed up and helped me put one foot in front of the other. And the therapist had very clearly explained to me that best friend and that journaling were what got me through this ordeal. And so it was very difficult to go through those 13 journals and relive all of that. But the journals transitioned into a story and a book one evening when another friend called after I could take phone calls and could move on a little bit. She asked if I was writing, and I said no. And she said that this would be a perfect opportunity to write. And I thought, she's right. I've already got all of these words down, and I didn't have to do any research. People who write great books and do great research, I am truly in awe of them. But I was living this, so I didn't have to research it. And it was my story because he wouldn't talk. So that's how it transitioned from journals to pages.
Well, we talked about in the beginning the act of teaching and what it's like to share, from one person to another, and the act of doing that is that there's a lot of similarities in teaching and storytelling, but there's something about taking something you've been through and then sharing it with others, where the story kind of becomes something bigger than the situation you went through. As you start writing it and you start kind of putting the pieces together and realizing that this story is going to be read by others. How did that recognition, do you think, how did that shape the way the book turned out?
Well, the editing process was excruciating.
I bet.
It was excruciating. My editor was Annie Tucker. Not only is she brilliant and gifted, but she knew, she understood how hard it was, and she supported me through that. When you go page by page, over and over, and relive it over and over and over again, after the months of working with Annie, I literally collapsed physically. I was sick. My body had just crumbled. But even as difficult as it was also a cathartic process. Again, if you look back at the beginning, when I was told I was pond scum and not worthy of airspace, and that no one would even want to talk to me, I was so evil. You of course don't want to share anything with anybody, but once it's down there and you're compelled to share it and revise it and relive it over and over and over, the pain starts to lessen, just almost imperceptive, in such small ways. But now, I mean, after the year of publication and events and editing and revising, and I can almost look at it as an out of body or as a third person, and think, who was despicable? It was the person who said, I'm finished and I don't want to talk about it. Because like you said, marriages end. Marriages end. Everybody knows that marriages end. But at least be respectful enough to say, I've changed my mind, or I don't think this is going to work. Be humane and respectful of the other person.
Kathryn, what sort of feedback have you gotten from people who have read the book? And how hard was it for you, when the process is done and then you're taking the story that's so deeply personal to you and putting it out for people to read, to process, to see how your story might fit into their life? What was that like for you, just getting it out to the world?
The actual logistics of it has been very difficult for me, because I am not a tech savvy person, nor am I a celebrity, or am I comfortable on social media. So that aspect has been very, very difficult. Conversely, I have been so humbled by the response that this book has received. It is, and I've said this repeatedly, and probably to everyone who I've spoken to, like we're speaking, the book has a life of its own. And I have a starred Kirkus review. I have a review by Diane Donovan at Midwest Book Reviews that brought me to tears. The response and the reviews that I have online are immense. The authors that have stepped forward to support me and endorse me. I am just humbled, awed, amazed, grateful to every single person that has helped me in this journey, including you. Thank you.
Well, it's a powerful, powerful story. And what we learn, in watching and walking with you through this pain, is that our stories are connected, in some way. And the act of sharing those stories, putting the words on the page, connects with people on levels and in ways that we never could imagine. So thank you for writing the story and for sharing it with us. When people get the book, what are you hoping that they take away from it?
I hope that if they're going through any kind of loss, it doesn't have to be the termination of a marriage. Any kind of loss requires grieving, and grieving is a process. And grieving is a process that Americans don't tolerate well. It is not an easy process, and it is not an even journey. It is not just a forward journey. It takes a great deal of strength and a great deal of time. So I hope that anyone who reads it will understand that if I can make it to the other side of that, they can make it. Because as you said, I am crystal clear that it was not a pretty sight for a good bit of time when this all began. I hope that people understand that I'm just an ordinary person. Just like we're all ordinary people, but we do have extraordinary strength if we will dig deep and tap into it. And we can develop in ways that we never even knew we could develop. And I hope that they understand that we're all interconnected, that every person, even when we present that we're doing well, and we are doing well, and we are happy, and we're grateful and everything, but every single person has some kind of hurt or pain inside. And just keep that in the back of our minds, that as we interconnect on a daily basis, a kind word is so much more helpful than a negative word, or a smile is so much more helpful than a gruff response.
Right. Kathryn, this has been great talking with you. The book is fantastic. 2-1 is available everywhere now. We're going to have links to it in the show notes. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show and for sharing your story. If people are just learning about you and your work, where can they connect with you online to learn more about what you do?
I have a website, KathrynTaylorBooks.com.
Excellent. I'm going to put links to it and send everyone to see you. Thanks for taking time to come on the show today, Kathryn.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Writing novels is hard, but Dabble makes it easier. Dabble replaces your word processor, doing what it can't. Dabble organizes your manuscript, story notes, and plot. It simplifies story, leaving more room in your brain to create. And after all, that is what being a writer is all about. Dabble was built from the ground up specifically for writing novels. It takes minutes to learn, and it makes writing a joy. See how Dabble will revolutionize the way you write with a free trial at www.dabblewriter.com. Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. You can find archives of all of the shows at hankgarner.com, and when you're there, please subscribe. Up next is an audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
The ancient building wore the severe cassock colors of a Puritan minister, a uniform monochrome of slate-gray shingles and soot-gray clapboards, its shadowed upper windows cross-hatched like the facets of a spider's eye. The second story protruded beyond the first and bore the house's only ornament, 2 gray teardrops of wood, weeping from each corner of the building's stiff upper lip. The place would have looked sinister and foreboding in its shadowed alley if not for the die-cut silhouette of a dancing sheep, jaunty above the door, and the 2 front bay windows that blazed with colorful, welcoming light. The windows were hung with orbs of colored glass on staggered lengths of ribbon. Each orb glowed with autumnal reds and delicate greens, burgundy tints and pumpkin hues, dappled raspberry and clover lime, streaked with light and weightless as bubbles over a cauldron. The shelves below offered crystal skulls and silver daggers and horny devils, Celtic chalices and woven dream catchers in dreamcoat hues. A primitive broom leaned in a corner, ready for flight, and a rhapsodic nude in bronze clutched her goat-legged lover beneath a jackal bust of Anubis. The interior of the shop was even witchier. Above a crude and sooty fireplace, a stack of brick barely holding the shape of a chimney pushed through the barn-high roof, threading ancient beams that crisscrossed overhead. Brooms and kettles and Christmas lights dangled from these, alongside Halloween costumes and Chinese umbrellas, pointy hats and bundles of herbs. Jason wandered deeper into the shop. His fingers trailed across strange bronze statuary and Aztec masks of turquoise and lapis lazuli. He rolled his eyes at the luck candles and money charms, but goggled indecently at a nude and anatomically correct silver nymph with long golden hair that reminded him of Kate. "See anything you like?" Jason jumped, turned, and jumped again. The woman standing before him was the living embodiment of every hippy-dippy counterculture type he'd ever seen. Her hair was green, her face pale and round, her doughy body wrapped in some elaborately woven ethnic garb. Her eyebrows were black and pierced in little rows, and her eyes were heavily circled with midnight blue, as if she'd been sucker-punched by an oil slick. She tapped the glass over the nymph. "Admiring the goddess, I see." She'd practically caught him with porn. "You want to hold her? She won't break. Here." The woman flipped open a glass door and handed Jason the naked figure. "See how heavy she is? You could bang her against the wall all day and barely make a dent." She waggled her eyebrows, obviously enjoying his discomfort. He checked the price tag. $700? The goddess is a symbol of love and fertility. Don't be ashamed of desiring her. The woman's long green fingernails plucked a long black cigarette from a long red case, and she lit it. "I sense," she blew smoke and studied its whorls, "dissatisfaction in love? Yes? I have just the thing." She pulled Jason into a side room where the smell of her clove smoke gave way to the skunky aromas of potpourri sachets, tea leaves, and hanging clutches of twiggy flowers. She searched, found a little bundle, and pressed it into his hand. "This will make you irresistible. Rub it on your nethers twice a day, and love shall surely find you." Jason made a face. The bundle smelled like cow manure. He didn't even want that on his hands.